it's a place to hang out. And I think those kinds of spaces, they're pretty new, but those are the places that we're going to see brands really find a great foothold.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this week's edition of the Campaign Mode podcast. And thank you for being there. It's nice to see you. I appreciate you listening or watching. My name's Dan Bennett. The Campaign Mode podcast, if you're new here, thank you for joining. If you're new here, appreciate it, is all about the world that exists at the intersection between gaming and brands. How brands can work with games and gamers, and how gamers should think about working with brands and professionalizing what it is they do as a passion. So on today's show, without further ado, we have Aaron Rutledge. Aaron is a user experience lead at Respawn Entertainment, and he's specifically responsible for the hugely successful, world-famous Apex Legends game. So we talk a lot about Apex. We get into what Respawn is doing and what they might have coming up. And Aaron has a background similar to me. He has a brand background. He's always been in the technology and user experience side of that business, and he pivoted a few years ago into the gaming world and has worked for some heavy hitters in the gaming space. So interesting background, and perfect for this show. Not only does he have a great background, he's a really interesting, really smart bloke. So difficult for someone like me to keep up with him, honestly. But we get into various things. One of the things we talk about, a very interesting perspective on the idea of a third place. A third place being not home, not work, but a place that you go to see friends, to socialize, to do the things that, and talk about the things that you love, and how gaming falls, especially right now, falls squarely and firmly into that space, and how important it is to think about gaming in that way, and how we need to be responsible when you think about it in that way, how it's more than just entertainment. It's a place where people go to connect. But Aaron gets into that more in the conversation. So without further ado, I'll come back for some chit-chatty waffle at the end, some housekeeping stuff, but I'm going to hand over now to the Zoom version of me, the Zoom version of Aaron Rutledge. I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the podcast, my friend Aaron Rutledge.
Hello.
Hey, bud.
How are you?
Very good, man. All the way from sunny California. Now, I want to say thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh,
and
my pleasure.
I'm going to do a very quick intro. Now, Aaron is the user experience lead on the world famous Apex Legends game. But what we usually do at the beginning of the podcast is I'm going to throw over to you for a couple of minutes just to get the 5-minute Aaron Rutledge. Give us some background, let us know how you got to where you are now, and then we'll dive in. Sure.
So, I grew up playing games. I think I got my first game console when I was 4 or 5. Started with an Atari 2600 back when I was really little, too little to even read the text on the screen. And then ultimately that led me to studying computer science and graphic design. I was always into computers. I've always been an indoor kid. Then when the first kind of web explosion hit, like in the late 90s, I found myself in New York working at agency.com, which was one of the first big kind of digital shops. And that sort of bridged me over from engineering and programming into advertising, like working with brands, working on products. And it actually brought me into interface design. That was where I cut my teeth on interface design. I hopped around New York a bunch from a couple little startups. I did a lot of little product designs. Then in 2007, a couple friends of mine and myself started the New York office of Poke, which was a kind of post-Web 2.0 agency based out of London.
Great agency.
Worked alongside Mother. So we opened the New York office there and did some really awesome, bizarre, everything you can think of, interactive, fun work. And then I kind of hit the kind of end of 5 or 6 years with Poke and really felt like I needed to make a move into games. There's no real game development or design that happens in New York. So I up and moved to LA, where I joined Riot Games, and I worked on League of Legends as their lead UX designer on League of Legends. That game kind of had this interesting point where it hooked in a lot of social with a lot of gaming because it was like always online, very, very high community interaction, right? So a lot of my stuff from advertising and social worked really well there. did that for a few years. I tried my hand at a big AAA game. I worked on Black Ops 4 for a little while. Really not for me. I don't like the boxed product AAA kind of release a game every 3 years kind of schedule. I really like the web, like everything is a live, constant evolution, right? So live services are more my style of game. And then I joined Respawn in the end of 2018, before Apex Legends was announced, to join, what was internally the Titanfall team, but to build this new online free-to-play battle royale set in the Titanfall universe. And I've been having fun ever since.
So you and I know each other from years when we may have been less grey in New York.
Oh yeah,
working on the brand and advertising side of things. And what's fascinating, having known you back then, and certainly known your experience and expertise in, user experience, user interface, those types of things, to see the reason why I wanted to get you on the podcast is to pick a little bit at that intersection of gaming as a platform and experience, a vocation for many, certainly a passion for many, and then how brands play a role and how brands and business to some extent can and should be playing a role in those worlds. But before we dive a bit further into that, for those of our listeners that are not as experienced with, maybe experienced with Apex, but perhaps not as experienced with Respawn, what's the skinny on Respawn? Because I know you guys are a part of EA, certainly Titanfall, a big title to come out prior to the Apex world, but what's Respawn up to generally?
Yeah, so the core of Respawn has a really awesome pedigree, where kind of a tight group of people there have been making games together for the better part of 2 decades now. There are some early people who worked on the original Medal of Honor franchise, which was one of the first World War II first-person shooters. Then that team, by and large, created Call of Duty with Activision. There was a bit of a falling out with Activision around the direction of the franchise, and that core team left and founded Respawn, with a fairly public lawsuit and a bunch of things that happened between Activision and that team. But they founded Respawn to really just focus on doing the kind of games that they really like to do, like redefining combat, redefining first-person narrative, really focusing on feel, stuff like that. And so they did Titanfall and Titanfall 2. I think a couple years back now, the studio was acquired by EA, but is by and large just left to its own devices. As long as everything's running great, just do things the Respawn way. And then since then, we launched Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order last fall, which was great. And then an Apex Legends about a year and change ago.
Yeah, which has been huge. Apex has had a big 12 months, right? I mean,
yeah, we had a really shocking launch, right? So we did a sort of a Beyonce moment with the game where we didn't tell anybody about it. It had been in development for a few years, and then we basically showed the press on Saturday, and then it was live on Monday, and the game just kind of came out. So, and the fact that it was free and from the team that made Titanfall, there was really a low barrier to entry for people to say, like, why not give it a try, right? So we had massive numbers off the rip. And then, obviously over time, everyone's going to take your free sample at Costco, but eventually you're going to dial into your core audience and the people who want to play every day or every week. And that's where we've been, since last spring. We've just been slowly gaining more and more momentum from our core audience.
Yeah, it seems to have picked up some significant momentum, which is massively impressive. Congrats to you, the guys.
So we're doing something interesting, which is we're cramming kind of these larger, almost comic book or movie grade story into a free first-person shooter, right? And that's largely not really been done before. So we're finding people are really attached to our characters and our world and the dynamics between those characters, right? So that's something that no other real game in our space is doing it quite that way. And people were really, really digging it. So
So, being the user experience lead, what does that mean as it relates to the gameplay and the narrative? What is that? What bookends the area of your responsibility?
Sure. So essentially, the easiest way to sum it up is that anything that is a two-dimensional image in the game pretty much has to go through me or my team and my artists, right? So that's from like the little ammo counters on the guns to what the map looks like to the splash screens, the menus, the settings, all of that stuff, right? So what we find is because it's a free-to-play game with a seasonal content schedule, we have new features and new content constantly dropping on a regular schedule. So a lot of it is managing the madness of like, we launched the game with 6 free characters, now we're pushing 15, right? So like over time, this interface and these menus have to scale and grow with all of the content we add and the new features and the new game modes and everything. So it's a lot of like chaos management.
Yeah, sounds like it. So as we move into, and that's a to be honest with you, that sounds like a pretty substantial role. I mean, if you think about all of those flat elements within that game, that's a hell of a lot, man. Good job. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, also, we really pride ourselves on like doing something really new in whatever game space we're playing with, right? Like, we kind of came at Battle Royale was like a game mode that we really loved, right? The throw everybody in a plane and get down to just one winner, right? And kind of the cardinal rule was like when you die, you're out. And then we're like, no, that's not true. So we're putting respawning into the game, so you have a second chance to come in. And that was like that kind of like blew everyone's minds when they're like, oh, I get a second chance if my team is working well. This is really cool. So when we're introducing all those things, this is stuff people don't have any reference for. So a lot of my job is like make it understandable at a glance, make it, you get what you're supposed to do. You hit X because X feels like the right button to hit, right? So there's a lot of like reducing all of the friction so that it all just kind of works.
So Warzone has borrowed your respawning element in that new platform.
I mean,
right?
I think after a month after we put out our game, Fortnite added the respawn van. So and now the Gulag is like a whole nother take on it, right? It's like you can come back and there's a second chance, but like there's some interesting stuff they're doing there where like your friends can buy you back out, or if they die with the same time, they can give you intel, right? There's a lot of cool little strategic bits that they're adding to it. But I think now we've seen Battle Royale, you're almost expected to have this like second chance mechanic now. So
it's interesting, isn't it, in gaming? Because if you think about how, one movie will inspire other movie makers, or a style of movie making might inspire another movie maker. We see a lot of that crossover happening in certainly some of these bigger free-to-play platforms, right? Where there's a common core understanding of how platform X works. And then some of those features definitely might feature in platform Y. And I love seeing that, how one is pushing the other and sort of elevating the game. It's a fascinating time from that point of view right now. Let's move into the brand side of things, something I know that you're also very familiar with. But how are you seeing, or where are you seeing, and this doesn't have to be within Apex, it can be anywhere within the space that you know so well, but where are you seeing brands play a successful role in gaming, and how are you seeing them do it?
So I think brands in general have had a really tricky time with games because the nature of games has kind of shifted over the past 2 decades, right? Where back in the day it was, I'm a generally young person, I want to go buy a game and I'm going to sit down at my television and I'm going to play it for 20, 40, 50 hours. And it's a singular experience. The narrative is from the game designer and writer to me, and that's it, right? So how does a brand fit into that? I'm not really sure. No one really found a good angle there. But what we've seen in the past kind of 10 years, 5 years in earnest is games going online, games becoming, changing from a hobby to almost a sport, right? Like there is a professional tier of gaming, and that's like a valid thing across the board. So I think we've seen really solid brand interactions with games around esports, because esports are such a simple model to follow, right? It's like sponsorship or play of the game or things like that. There's all these analogs in traditional sports that can be copied in esports. So that seems like a really simple thing, and I've seen a lot of that stuff be really effective. Different sponsorships of teams, different sponsorships of tournaments, all that stuff can really drive up a lot of interest and can like put a nice brand against a very targeted demo, right? When you see like 50,000 people watched this first-person shooter tournament, like you pretty much can peg exactly gender, location, and age bracket from just who's watching. Less and less over time, but it's a pretty targeted demo.
Yeah.
I'd see and then once you get into the actual game itself, driving games, obviously, those are all licensed, right? So if you want to drive an Acura in a driving game, Acura, you got to strike that deal with them, right? Sports games are the same thing. You have to sign the rights to the franchise and all the player rosters and stuff. So that stuff is a little bit more formal. But like consumer brands and stuff, it's still really tricky.
And this is why that area interests me so much right now, because, and actually one of the reasons that propelled this podcast is that there's sort of alchemy happening, especially with some of the consumer brands, that organically you might not think, well, that there's a role, right? And one of the things I've discussed with some of the other guests on this show has been how difficult it is to be authentic, right? It's easy enough to go along as a big stock, Ford or Acura, to go along to one of the driving games and say, all right, let's do a big deal, and here's some renderings of the cars, and you can put them in. And that's very traditional. There's traditional mechanics in how you do that,
yeah.
right? As opposed to something, and we've cited it in the past, but something like, what Wendy's did with the frozen burgers in Fortnite, right? Okay, you and I know how agencies work, and there's a couple of young creatives that came up with this interesting little hack of that Fortnite platform. But the Fortnite community as a whole embraced it because it was they knew how the platform worked and they knew how to play a role in that platform. How are you seeing, or have you seen those types of engagements with Respawn properties? Has that been something that you guys have leaned into, or not so much?
Not really. I think we've done some stuff around esports, and we've done some stuff. Essentially all of the things that Respawn does are pretty tightly narrative consistent worlds. So bridging over a real world brand into this fictional world feels off, right? We have brands in the fictional world and they're all made up and they're all part of the story.
Right.
So it's really tricky to bridge that gap with a lot of, with like the Titanfall and the Apex world. It wouldn't feel right to have Wendy's in Apex because it's 250 years in the future. It's in the Outlands. All the corporations are different, right? It's supposed to be.
Right.
So that part's really tricky. But what I've seen is there's a concept from a book called The Great Good Place by Ray Oldenburg. And he identifies that like modern society needs, you have your workplace, where you have your professional relationships, you have your family place, your home place, where you have your intimate relationships. But all societies need this third place, right? This is frequently filled by the pubs in the UK, right? The barbershops in America, cafes. These are your places where you have social interactions with low stakes, no pressure of work, no familiar pressure, but you get to hang out, you get to decompress, you get to be your authentic self, right? And as the world digitizes more and more and everyone's online more and more, we have less and less of these third spaces in physical space. So what we're seeing is young gamers pulled this together in Minecraft. Minecraft became this amazing third place that kids could hang out and have, low stakes social interactions. Then we saw Fortnite grow into that as well. Right? Other games have done it pretty well. World of Warcraft did it, but Fortnite is probably right now the quintessential third place, right? It's like kids between certain ages, 12 to 15 or something like that, they come home from school, they hang out with their friends in Fortnite. It's not that they're trying to accomplish something in Fortnite. It's not that they're there to play a story. It's a place to hang out. And I think those kinds of spaces, they're pretty new, but those are the places that we're going to see brands really find a great foothold, right? Like the the Travis Scott concert that just happened in
Yeah.
Fortnite. Phenomenal, right? Like
Yeah.
it created this event that everybody wanted to hang out for, and you hung out with your friends and you built memories around this very limited, very exclusive thing. And as a brand, that was a fantastic experience, right? I expect to see way more of that, right? More and more stuff around it's not part of the story, it's not part of a tournament for esports, but it's part of this open social space.
Yeah, that's a what a fascinating lens to look at that through. And it's interesting when you take away, as you were talking, I was thinking about this from a brand point of view. If you're a marketer and you take away the idea, as a marketer thinking about how to ingratiate your brand to a gaming community, if you take away the platform for a minute and think about the third place as the idea, how you would show up in an environment where people are congregating and they're not, like you said, they're not talking about work, they're not really talking about family, they're just taking that moment to decompress and probably just talk about whatever it is top of mind. That might help you then think about where you show up and how you show up as a brand, right? You know, we've had, in the last couple of years, plenty of brands or some brands that have come along wanting to be in, we'll use Fortnite as an example, wanting to be in Fortnite. And candidly, it's not relevant for most brands, right? And that's hard for a lot of brands to get their head around. You and I know this, right? Usually, if you're a big brand, and we have worked with the biggest brands in the world, they've got the money, right? So I've got the money. I mean, I can go and buy the spot in the Super Bowl, or I can do the big out-of-home engage, or I can sponsor the football team. But, and I know this firsthand with some of the big gaming platforms, when you go to them as an agency, it's not that they're rude, they're just uninterested, right? It isn't core to how they make money in many ways. They know it's not core to how their community behaves. But I do think putting that lens of a third place on it helps me reassess and helps me rethink actually about how you would show up authentically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, from a game designer point of view, the things that I'm interested in hearing about from a brand is how can a brand realistically create or work with a experience that is better because of that brand being there, right?
Right.
Like like the Avengers Endgame promo that Marvel did with Fortnite, they threw Thanos in there, and for 5 days you could play Thanos. It wasn't a huge ad for the movie. It was just timely, and all those players, those millions of players, played games and said like, "Oh, cool, Thanos is in here. I can goof around with that," right? So their gameplay benefited from it. They made unique experiences. It felt like it fit in world. It was just, that was a nice, tidy little package. So you have to really look for more things like that, right? Like if I were to say like, what's Charmin going to do in Apex? And I'm like, I don't know how that makes those million players the next hour have a better game, right? They get something they never had before, right? They experience something unique. Maybe it's there. That's the creative challenge, right?
Yeah.
It has to fit in. It has to feel natural, right?
So, per the fact that we're both sitting in our homes right now, we're in the middle of this, in the middle of this thing, or maybe towards the end, we'll see, knock wood. But how have you seen, I guess professionally, and it's great to have an insider on this, but so professionally and personally as well, but how have you seen the gaming world change? I mean, how have your own gaming habits changed, and what do you think this world's going to look like when we come out of this?
I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface of these shared virtual worlds and these like big online communities of games. Like what we're seeing is, coming from, years on League of Legends, there's a big core of that audience. They wouldn't say they're gamers. They say they play League. Like that they're not like the core of that audience isn't hopping around from game to game as a new system comes out, as a new console comes out. Some of these players have been playing for 8, 9, 10 years on a single account, right? It's like they're not a gamer, they're a League player. And I think we're going to see more and more fragmentation of that, where people self-identify with a single world, with a single set of IP, and they just commit to it, right? That's going to be a challenge more and more. You know, you have a lot of games that come out that have like little or no IP or something to relate to. And they're fun mechanically for a short period of time, but then people churn out of them. So I think the target in game design is to how do you build these evergreen experiences, right? And that's really a challenge from a game design standpoint.
Do you see in Apex on platform, in game, do you see the type of community, and I know that there's a very different premise, but do you see the type of community that you referenced in something like a Fortnite? Do you think the same thing exists there in terms of, guys hanging out for an hour?
I think Apex is a little tricky in the fact that we designed the game to really be about a team of 3, right? Playing in a set of 3 is the perfect way to play the game. The abilities all complement each other that way. And that works really great until you have a set of 4 guys that you want to hang out with right after work. Or maybe it's just you and one other guy, right? So we're working through a lot of things around that, around finding the right shape. But yeah, we definitely see patterns of like this same group of 2 or 3 people play together repeatedly every day. And it's like, it's a hobby. It's where they go to hang out. I think you could expect more things from us that reinforce that. Like this is a place you come frequently to hang out, and more features around social aspects and things like that, right? Like that we're going to evolve the game to do more of those kinds of things.
Do you think we have on our hands when it comes to Fortnite and certainly Apex, maybe Warzone? I mean, that remains to be seen. But do we have real franchise longevity in these things? It feels like we do. I think about Star Wars, right? The first of those came out 2 years before I was born, and arguably, and you referenced the title, but it's certainly more valuable than it's ever been, but it's still as relevant as it's ever been. I feel like these games, and you hit on it earlier with the AAA games, like out the box, yes, you can update, limited ability to do that. But in a platform in a world where you can push a change overnight and keep pace with what's happening, I feel like they're here to stay, right?
Yeah, I think the live service, I'm a personal huge believer in live service games. I think there's strengths and weaknesses to them, right? It's very hard to tell a really complete emotional story like The Last of Us, like Uncharted, like Titanfall 2, right? Those narrative experiences are so far almost impossible to do in a live service game. We're taking swings at it, right? We're trying to introduce story and narrative in some interesting ways, but the free-to-play nature of the game, it becomes like the pickup basketball court in your neighborhood, right? It's like, how do you tell an epic movie story at a pickup basketball court? It's like in little fragments, and it's very, very tricky. I don't think anyone's cracked that yet. So there are always people who are going to want to play these epic 40-hour adventures that at the end they go, yes, that was amazing, and the credits roll, right? I find myself playing less and less of those games. I have less and less time for it. What I can do is I can throw 30 minutes in to play a couple rounds of Apex with my brother after work, but I can't bring myself to put 6 hours against a huge, like, long-running RPG. It just doesn't fit in my lifestyle anymore. And I would assume that
don't you have an unfair advantage against your brother when it comes to Apex? I would feel like that doesn't feel like a very fair playing field.
You would think so, but unfortunately, I kind of say, I would draw to, like, just because I work at the NBA doesn't mean I can play on that level, right? It's like I'm designing the game, and I know a lot about the game. I know an obscene amount about that game and how it's made. But yeah, I'm not very good.
It's really funny because I play across a few different platforms right now, and I'm deeply into it. I'm deeply into the world, and I'm deeply into each of them. I know them intimately, but I get my ass handed to me almost every time, especially like on Warzone right now. Every time I drop in, I'm just getting smoked by,
Yeah.
I imagine just some
Well, I
14-year-old
mean,
kid
a lot
laughing
of that comes down to, part of my job around thinking about the experience of games is how do you let the dads play and not
Right.
get ruined, right? I want 12-year-old kids who Apex is their first serious competitive shooter to have a good experience. I want the 22-year-old esports professional to have a great experience, and then I want the dads to have a good experience, right? So there's a lot of stuff about like detecting skill and putting them into the right matchmaking buckets, and there's lots of little things we can do to make it so that you don't just land and an 8-year-old 360 no scopes you and you go, why am I even playing this, right?
Yeah, takes me out every time. So we're getting pretty close to time. I just wanted to, one of the things one of the things I like to ask is if there's anything in the last couple of weeks that you hit on Travis Scott. Certainly Travis Scott's been a big one on here, but is there anything else that you've seen recently that's just you, and it could well be a Respawn thing that you've just thought, wow, that's interesting, that's impressive, that's a moment?
Well, I mean, I see as the Gen 5 consoles are coming out and we're starting to hear more and more features about what Microsoft's doing and what Sony's doing, and by and large what's happening on PC and even mobile. I see this huge movement towards platform agnostic play, especially for these more social games, where it doesn't matter if you're on your phone or if you're on a computer or if you're on an Xbox. Your friends are all there because that's the world that you want to connect to, right? And I'm seeing little glimpses of cool stuff coming from Sony and Microsoft and some of their press announcements on, like, you buy a game for Xbox One and it'll run on the Xbox Series X, right? The same game will connect, everything works just out of the box. So I see this removing of barriers from between platforms that I think is going to be really great for just for gamers, right? It's going to be a nightmare for developers because we have to make all that separate software all talk to each other. But if we can successfully get that out of the way, and it's like this guy has a phone and this guy has an Xbox and this guy has a PlayStation and then their friend has a PC and they all just connect and it all just works. I think that's how you create these magical spaces that are really cool.
It's going to be interesting seeing how the connected device thing plays out when it comes to, I mean, I don't know if you've ever played one of the, something like a Fortnite on cell phone. I know there are people that specialize in it. It's really rough, right?
It's hard.
It blows my mind to think that you as an experienced designer has to think about how you take all of that detail and shrink it into,
it's very
something
hard.
this big. That's wild. Good luck with that one, bud. All right, man. Listen, this has been great. Thank you. Thank you really for coming on. I know you're super busy right now with everything that's happening at Apex, but this was massively insightful. So I want to thank Aaron Rutledge, who is User Experience League at Apex, or on Apex at Respawn, and my mate, for joining me today. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers, bud.
See ya.
Okay, now that's Aaron Rutledge, and I want to thank Aaron for coming on. Dialing in from the West Coast, taking a minute out of his very busy day to sit and talk to us about everything he's up to and the work they're doing on Apex and the things they're doing at Respawn. I love talking to him. Takes me back a few years to when we used to get to work together, and I always loved that too. So thank you, Aaron, for joining us. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We have more folks like Aaron, and no one's like Aaron, but similar to Aaron, coming up in the next few weeks from various different platforms and in various different roles, both on the brand and gaming side. So if you have questions or you want us to throw things out there or discuss certain things, then send us an email or find us on social media and you can fire those over to us. Like and subscribe. Make sure you get the notifications for new shows coming out. I try and put these out once a week. And in between, we have some smaller shows that we put out focused on the strategy of gaming and branding. But I guess that's it. That's the show for today. The world's upside down right now in multiple ways, and I just hope I hope you guys are being nice to each other and doing what you can to help support the change that the world needs to see. And yeah, I don't want to get too political, but I can't not address it. So anyway, thank you for joining us. Again, if it's your first time joining, come back next week. If you've been here already, thank you. I really appreciate it. It means a lot. And we'll see you next time on the Campaign Mode podcast. Thank you, guys.